What's up, guys? Nick and I are back here with another review series. This one's a little bit different from our set reviews. We're going to be digging a little bit deeper into how to build a deck and like what you should be doing to kind of get your feet off the ground with the various builds in this game. There are plenty of ways that you can, see a deck list or whatever, and someone can suggest something to you. But until you really kind of get it, like what the core of putting a deck together is, it's sometimes tough to make sense of like what the directions are you're even being given. So this is going to be the first episode in a series of videos where we just kind of break down like fundamental steps of putting your deck together. We're going to start with some freestyle stuff and eventually get into some videos about other masteries, etc. But this one is just the basics, like if the first thing you're going to do when you get started with a deck, and how you get the ball rolling. Uh, if you know Magic at all, Magic the Gathering, you've heard the Power Nine. Even if you don't know Magic the Gathering, you probably like if you know card games at all, you've probably heard the phrase the Power Nine. There's like nine cards from the original set of Magic that are like batshit broken, and they're all on a list that can't be printed again. Blah 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 blah. So we talked a little bit, Nick and I, and even some other people too, but specifically Nick and I making this video about like what we think are the Power Nine or whatever of this set or of this game, and we went with seven because seven Dragon Balls makes sense, right? But Power Seven is sort of the seven cards that if you're gonna put a deck together, it doesn't matter what you're building, what you're doing, you're probably gonna run these. So I'm just gonna let Nick take over here with like just kind of breaking down the why some of these cards are on this list, and uh, just get right into it.
So the first thing to note with these cards is that all of them are limit one because they are all obscenely broken. As Derek said, the kind of core part of this video is to explain how to build a deck, and the basics of building a deck for me always start with these seven cards. Um, Look, I'm not saying that there's not some corner case scenario you could find where you don't want to play one of these cards, but like for the most part, any deck you build will contain these seven cards. If you are playing a deck with City and Turmoil and no non-combats, then Fatherly and Expectant are the only two non-combats you're going to put in your deck. The three on the bottom here, Nappa's Physical, Vegeta's Physical, and Super Saiyan Effect. Your anti-physical cards are super important. Physical decks can absolutely run you over very quickly. Nappa's Energy Aura kind of meets the same purpose. It's very good at stopping the energy decks that can throw a bunch of attacks. And of course, everybody knows Time. Time stops all attacks. These are kind of your defensive cards. These five are your defensive cards. They stop all your opponent's attacks. They cut off what your opponent's game plan is to give you time to set up. Expectant Trunks is the most powerful non-combat in this game because it's a when entering combat effect. I realized that yes, it can't search your life deck, which makes it a little weaker on its face than Fatherly, but being used when entering a combat effect, it's very hard to interact with. So most of the time when you play Expectant Trunks, you're going to get to use Expectant Trunks. Um, Fatherly Advice, physical energy combat or combat card, deck or discard pile, obscenely powerful effect. Basically, with these seven, if you are going to build a deck, you need to have the best justification in the world as to why you're not going to include one of these seven cards in your deck, and it's probably still wrong. So the cornerstone of every deck for me is these seven cards.
Yeah, I don't think you'll ever play a deck without them. At least not one that I think you're doing right. So next slide here, we've got hero or villain. Obviously, there are heroes only cards, villains only cards. Uh, Nick, why should I pick hero? Why should I pick villain? And if so, what do I do when I do?
Well, so why you pick hero or villain is really based more around what master you're playing, who you want your MP to be. Generally speaking, the rule is that if you're playing a rogue, you need a reason to be hero because some of the villains only cards are a little bit stronger, a little bit better, but in general, but overall, there's value in playing both heroes and villains. The first two cards on the screen, Confrontation and 18 Stare Down, these are kind of mirror cards. Basically, every hero's deck should play 3 Confrontation, every villain's deck should play 3 Stare Downs. Obviously, if you're 18, you can play 4 Stare Downs, which is obviously also means that 18 is always going to be villain, which is fine. But Just kind of as a general rule, whichever, if you're hero you play confrontation, if you're villain you play 18. They're kind of in the same boat as the Power 7, where I don't imagine there's a deck that I would ever not play these cards. Maybe there's some 50 card decks where you don't want to play all three. You know, maybe you're playing speedball, maybe you're only playing two confrontations or something like that. But overall, these are cards you want to auto include in every deck depending on which one you are. Villains also get one more effect. They get Cell's Defense, which Cell's Defense is, it's an interesting card. It's kind of like Time, but it's a little worse than Time, or a little better depending on who you ask. Um, so it's a stop all, much like Time. Um, it does not stop both attacks. It only stops the first attack that is thrown. So if your opponent throws a physical first and you play Cell's Defense, it will stop all physicals for that turn. Or if they throw an energy first and you play Cell's Defense, it will stop all energies for the turn. Now, the big thing is this is not your opponent's. These are just all physicals or all energies. So it's a little bit harder to line up correctly. If you're playing a hybrid deck, this could hurt you a little bit. And the other major thing too, if you're not familiar with Cell's Defense, is that if your opponent throws a focused attack first, this card can be played. It will not stop the focused attack, but it will stop all future focused attacks, whereas Time does not. So if they throw a focused physical, you can throw this out, take the damage from their focused physical, and then all of their future physicals are stopped. Cell's Defense is another card. I think this one's actually a little bit more interesting because there's a lot of people who don't always play Cell's Defense in every villain's deck. I play Cell's Defense in every villain's deck. I think you should. I can't justify a reason not to. Stopping all of your opponent's attacks is insanely good. If you're a villain's energy deck, this card just says stop all physicals, and that's amazing. If you're a villain's physical deck, this card says stop all energies. And if you're some sort of hybrid deck, then unless your opponent is also a hybrid deck, you can still just stop whichever one they're throwing at you and play defense. I think that this game, a lot of the problem people have when they're building decks is that the decks don't have enough defense and they just get ran over. So anytime you can have a free stop all, which is what this is another stop all, it's a card you should put in your deck. So these cards, again, I play 3 of all of them in all of the decks that I can. Confrontation, all my heroes decks, stare down, and one Cell's Defense, of course, it's as its limit 1 in my villains decks. But these are also auto includes to me. After I start with the main 7, I move to these cards, and these cards fill the next slots in my deck.
Yeah, I think it's cool you brought up self-defense. I think it is kind of a slept-on card. I think more people should be using it. And like you said, even if it hits like some of your cards, if you're a hybrid thing, unless they're specifically also hybrid and then it messes you both up or whatever, like you're going to hurt them with more number of cards than it would hurt you. If you have like one physical attack, it'll stop because you're a hybrid and your opponent has three. Like, that's worth it. So yeah, play self-defense. Okay,
Okay.
so the
Oh,
negation
go ahead.
cycle. It's just a style sphere. There's one of them in every color. We've just got two orange and Namekian here pictured for visual effect. But in NZ, the new Z cards that we run here in the league, there is one of these for every color. Most decks play some number of sphere. You should be at least guaranteed playing your style sphere.
Yeah. I mean, all of the negations are very good at what they do, very good in the style they're in. Another thing they give you is, if your opponent is playing some random strategy that maybe cares about something like a Dragon's Victory, it gives you a card that's not named Trunks Energy Sphere that can interact with that effect, which is really, really beneficial. Um, Personally, I think that all of them except Saiyan are insanely good, and they're not even a question. Saiyan, you can talk yourself into not putting in decks, but it's still just wrong to do so. This is still just a Trunks Energy Spear with upside, and the upside's always going to be good enough to play. Most of these effects are very strong and fit very directly into what the deck's doing. If you're on a Saiyan beatdown deck, it fits great into there. The black one and red and blue, which are not pictured here, are obviously all amazingly strong. The orange and negation or in Namekian, as you can read here, are obviously very, very good. The blue one, of course, is great too. Uh, the negation cycle is something that should just go in your deck every time. I made this their own slide because I wanted to talk a little bit about freestyle. Freestyle doesn't get to play any of these, which is unfortunate. It is a loss to be freestyle because you do not get any of these great effects. But that is the one spot you will not play these in. Is obviously if you're freestyle, you're stuck on just sphere.
That said, though, we should still talk about sphere.
So this slide I labeled the 80% club because I think in 80+% of decks you should play these two cards. Let's talk about Sphere first, actually, since we're already kind of on the topic. My normal builds at this point are one negation and one Sphere. I do think there's plenty of justification for playing one negation and two Spears if that's what you want to do. I also think there are some decks where you should play one negation and zero Spears. If I am playing a red MPPV deck, I do not play Trunks Energy Sphere in that deck at all. Now, I do play the red negation. Obviously, draw a card or gain 2 anger is amazing in that shell. It's what you want to be doing. But I do think that there's a lot of formats, a lot of decks that don't want to play Trunks Energy Sphere. If you are in Tough Enough, especially, I found that Sphere is a lot less valuable in Tough Enough than it is in Standard. If you're playing in Standard, though, I like the 1-1 split a good percentage of the time. One thing I'll also note is that I have seen a few people play 3 Spheres and a negation. I do think that there is value in that in very, very specific decks, which we'll get into, more in the future in the series with, specific masteries and specific deck builds. But like, if you're starting to build your deck generically, I think 1 Sphere, one negation is kind of where you want to be. Any thoughts on that?
I think that's fair. It's been kind of a hot topic around the league for the last year and a half or so that the negations have been like real widely used. There's been it was always like kind of traditional, right, in kind of historical score that people would play just flat 3 spheres all the time. And so when the negations came out and people were like started using them, they're like, oh, it's just a fourth sphere for every deck. That's crazy. But as the game kind of moved on, I think maybe some of it too was like the threat of there being 4 spheres in every deck. Like sometimes combat cards, like the use of them dwindled a little bit. So it just kind of got to this point where like maybe you don't need 4 spheres or even three. And so for a while, the sort of vibe of what you should do with them was like just play the one negation. Like screw the spheres, they're freestyle cards. You don't need them. But Nick, I think you're right that there are like a number. There are a good enough number of really strong combat cards that are still very present, and getting caught by a deck using them when you're not ready will still run you over real bad. So I think 1-1 is like a super good split. I
Yeah.
think having the negation is like your obvious number one, but the second slightly worse instance of your negation now is still absolutely worth having.
One other thing about Trunks Energy Sphere that's different from the negations is that it doesn't remove from game. So playing 1-1 gives you this card as an option to recur with your Fatherlies and your expected Trunks and some of the powerful cards we showed you earlier. So just having one copy of this in your deck that you can, use multiple times sometimes could also be very valuable. And to kind of back up, my take on this perspective, my Score Warriors Gather winning deck list is posted in the league. I only played 2 Trunks Energy Sphere even in score only because I don't think that playing 3 or 4 copies of this card is where you want to be.
Hey, there you go. Time tournament proven results.
So,
So 80% club, right? 80% of the time, Vic drill. I think that might be a controversial take. Tell me about it.
well, so first of all, a big chunk of them is ally-based things. If you're playing any kind of ally-based deck, Victreal's not something you're going to want to auto-include. Um, and the other part of that 20%, and this is a much lower part of it, but it's a part that you really need to factor in. Any deck that care about anchor control. So if you're playing, some sort of Dragon's Victory deck, or like if I'm playing against a Roshi or a Dragon Ball deck, maybe an 85 card draw ball deck, I don't want Victral. If it's in my deck, I won't pull it out. I'll leave it in my deck
Nope.
because in those matchups specifically, this card is not very good. You don't want to keep them on their levels. Any deck that wants to camp level 1, this card does not feel as strong against. So if I'm not like hurting for the stages, especially more, this is more in standard for me. If I'm not like, if I don't really need the stages, and if I have good anger control, if I'm in blue or if I'm in a color that can lower anger kind of at will or whenever I need to, then I like to avoid Victorious Drill because in a lot of those matchups, you're going to want to use things like, maybe your Blue Saga or Blue Style Trunk Saga Mastery, or just various random anger that they're going to gain throughout the match in order to level them. So like if you run it into like say a Goldo deck, which Goldo, if you know anything about Goldo, is he's obviously a camp level 1 deck. Not having to put this into play is super beneficial in those kind of matchups, because like you don't want this in play against Goldo, because you want Goldo to play his black roundhouse and gain a random anger here and a random anger there to eventually get to 5 to get him off of his powerful level 1. Vinegar is another personality. Like there's a lot of personalities that this is really good to just not level up your opponent. So if I'm playing a deck that does not care about stages at all via an ally deck, or maybe I just have a few allies, or maybe I'm just purely physical, maybe I got a big PUR, there's a lot of like justifications you can get in for just not even putting this card in your deck. So I think the core is if you're on an ally deck, you don't want this. You know, I play like a lot of Cell Namekian Energy Beats decks. You don't play Victorill in those decks. I play a lot of I got some Spirit Bomb decks. You don't want anything like this in those decks. You don't want things that are going to power you up to where you're going to have to gain stages to find more ways to lose those stages. But I think that a lot of physical beats decks, especially physical beats decks that have ways to gain stages or allies or anything that can justify not playing this, I think this card can do more harm than good. And I think that even when it's in your deck, there are times when you should not put it in play. Yeah, note this is a May ability. You do not have to search for this and put it into play, and there are times
Yeah.
you shouldn't. And the fact that most players are not good enough to know when those times are is another reason to me that if you don't need the stages and you have a decent amount of anti-anger anyway, or you're playing tough enough and you're just not worried about that, this is a card you could cut, and you should cut more often than anybody will.
Yeah, I think you're right. Nick, you and I both play Divinity Blue Blue Divinity Boo and or not Blue Divinity, sorry, Blue Trunk Saga Boo.
Hmm.
And that's another deck where like I like to have this card, but there are a ton of times where I don't bring this out because it will be much more beneficial for me to just keep your anger going up and just have like little monicums of control of it over the course of the game, as opposed to just like constantly lowering your anger. Because I can set up my mastery to just be dumping a ton of extra damage into my attacks because of the attached card. My Boo, has a good enough PR to not need the extra two or whatever. I don't really care as long as I'm not a zero. I'm still hitting you for D and E or whatever. So it still feels perfectly fine to not put out a Victreal. In fact, it feels better most of the time.
Yep.
So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's just sometimes where ripping this out of your deck just isn't the right answer.
Yeah, and if the blue Trunk Saga deck, at least my version of it, plays 3 Pycon's Leg Catch and 3 blue Overpowering Aura, which both power you to
Yep.
full. So, and you're also playing Majin Buu's Heel Kick, which gains you stages. And once you've got enough stage gain, you don't want this card anymore. It becomes
Mhm.
more of a detriment to your plan than it does a positive.
Yep. There have been plenty of times where I have like before I sort of started not bringing Victreal out with the Boot Trunks deck. Definitely, guilty party here of using Victreal more often than I should. There were plenty of times where I'd run into where I was just like, man, I actually don't like what this is doing to my own strategy. So
Hmm.
once I started not putting it out, everything started to kind of click into place a little better. And yeah, I fully agree. So anti control. Um, let's talk about the title of the slide, what we got pictured, and take a second to break it down the newly included card here too.
Okay, so Gohan's Kick and Piercing Beam. If you're unfamiliar with Piercing Beam, obviously this is a new card. Yeah, the card's titled Gohan's Kick for deck construction purposes. What that means is you can mix and match, but you can only get 4 if you're Gohan copies of these two cards combined. That's fine because these cards are exactly the opposite and they go in the opposite decks. Um,
Mhm.
Energy decks have long been terrible in standard, and the main two reasons the energy decks are bad in standard exist on the opposite sides of Piercing Beam on this card. Gohan's Kick and Majin Buu's Fury are the two best anti-control cards that exist in the game. They always have been. These are physical attacks that stop your control deck from doing control deck things. They're extremely strong cards. Piercing Beam is kind of the nod to Gohan's Kick here. Piercing Beam is single-handedly putting energy decks into standard. Now, I will say before this has always been my take. I do not play Gohan's Kick in Tough Enough, and I will not play Gohan's Kick in Tough Enough. I don't think it's good enough, and I don't think that like the big get for these cards for me is the ending combat because it's really good against the Dragon Ball decks that just want to end combat over and over. So yeah, catching the stop balls is great, but like I don't think that these cards are necessarily good enough to see play in a lot of tough enough decks. Now, these cards are staples in standard. If you're playing a physical beats deck in standard, you need to have the maximum number of Gohan's kicks somewhere. Like I've been guilty of playing them in my Sensei deck, and just bringing them in the matchups where they're good, but which is fine. But you need to have access to this. Now with Piercing Beam, you can have the same amount of access in an energy deck. The good part about Piercing Beam is that physical for +3 and energy for 4, although the generic base damages, energy for 4 is just way better than physical for +3. So with that said, you can just play this in your main deck and feel fine about it 90% of the time. Like you can just jam this in your deck. This is a generic energy attack. You know, they can't play stop balls, whatever. That's all good. Piercing Beam is a card that for me, if I'm playing an energy standard deck, it's an auto include as a 3 of. I'm going to put it in there every time. I'm going to feel great about it being in there. I do the same thing with Gohan's Kick most of the time, although I don't feel as good about it in physical decks. And the last thing I want to talk about is Majin Buu's Fury. Majin Buu's Fury can just break decks. There are a lot of strategies that
Yeah.
are based around doing random nonsense on your attack phase, and Buu's Fury saying attack or pass. A lot of times that just means, okay, opponent, you have to pass now. And that's incredible. It's incredible against most deck styles. It's MPPV decks that want to use like Red Trunk Saga Mastery to level, they can't use that. Any kind of like in combat shenanigans go away with this. Any orange MBS, sack a drill, go get 2 drills. It just cuts off most of the control decks from doing everything that they do. Yes, they can still stop all you and stuff like that, but there are other ways around that as well. But the fact that Boost Fury just cuts off basically anything your opponent's going to do helps out a ton. Also, the fact that just randomly Raise Your Anger 1 is tacked onto Boo's Fury means that if you got to play it in an energy deck, you don't feel that horrible about it because a lot of energy decks like to Raise Your Anger. So, overall, if I'm playing a physical deck, I'm going to have max Boo's Furies and access to max Gohan's Kicks, even if they're not in the main. If I'm playing an energy deck, I'm going to be maxing Piercing Beam in the main. I think it's an easy auto include in the main deck. These are the cards that get you, a lot of times against like a speedball deck, you only need one. If you Piercing Beam one time against a speedball deck, a lot of times you will just kill them that turn, and you just win.
Yep.
And that is a risk that they take when they build their deck in a certain way. This is the punishment.
Yeah, I think Piercing Beam, we've talked about this at length in other places, but Piercing Beam is long overdue. And I think Gohan's Kick in not being in your tough enough deck is a take that I think is actually pretty smart too. I know there's a ton of people who will just like off rip disagree with that. They'll be like, no, I just play 3 Gohan's Kick all the time always. But I think you're totally right that there are like using it to get past like the chance of them having a stop ball isn't what you're doing Gohan's Kick for. I mean, it's a nice benefit that comes with it. If you're a beatdown deck, you want your beatdowns to beat down, but like staying in combat is way more important. So that's the part that's always been a huge factor of this card. So I think you've got a good point of not running it, not using the space up in your tough enough deck for that card. I think that's a really a very aware take. And yeah, Fury, I mean, nothing has to be said about Fury. Fury is like an obvious 3 of for any deck that wants to do some punching. Just telling your opponent they can't do most of their turn is insane. The best friends, the 3 amigos. These guys are 3 allies that go in realistically just about everything. There is they're like focused allied decks where you've got a ton of allies and you got your 10, 12, 15, whatever allies your deck is playing. And that's fine. That's like a different beast. Although these guys will still be in those too probably. But just like your average Joe standard whatever deck, hero or villain will take plenty of advantage in these 2 allies. Glorio and 14 are kind of the same card, so we'll get into that in a second. Toribot is a card that everyone can play. Toriyama's for everyone. But Nick, why let's talk about Toribot first. Why should everyone have Toribot?
So, first off, Toribot can be played by any personality, which gives it a lot of added benefit there. Its power can be used no matter your MP stages. So if you're not a deck that cares about turning on allies and you're just kind of doing your own thing, like Toribot's still live, and you can still just draw a card, discard a card. This game is really bad about having overruns where your opponent draws a great hand and you draw a bad hand and it's like, oh, I might be just dead. Toribot just drawing a card when you're generally only playing 4 cards at a time, and he could replace one of those cards, can absolutely be the difference in losing a game and versus continuing to play on. So just the ability to draw a card and then discard a random non-combat or something you drew is insanely powerful. The last and biggest piece to me for Toribot as to why he's so good is his power level. Z is amazing. It's until you've had a deck where your MP's in B or something like that, you don't really realize how powerful being in Z is. So if you're playing, Majin Buu or somebody like that, like just being able to say, oh, your power does, evil boost power physical for +3. All right, does 5. Like whereas if he had you at 0 previously, it would be doing 7, or sometimes even more than that, depending on where they're at. It could be 8, or if he gets to level 2, then we could be looking at it being in G and doing 10, or 11 with his level 2 power. So like the way that you can negate damage by being at Z power level with an ally is so strong. I've played a Popo deck. I'm pretty well known for playing that, where my allies are Toribot, Gregory, and King Kai, because we're going to be in Z, and that's part of the
Zebo
defense
way.
of the deck is to be in Z. So Toribot being able to do that is great. There is a little bit of the counter offensive too, where you throw a generic physical for 4, then it doesn't matter who you're throwing it into, it does 6, which is hey, not bad when you're playing some Videl or some shitty personality. So I just Toribot's one of those allies, man. If you're gonna play 3 or less allies in your deck, Toribot should just be one of those allies.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Just Z access, draw cards, everyone gets him. I don't care if you're gonna play 0 allies, I would play one Toribot. Let's talk about 14 now. He's a little older than Glorio here, a little more famous for his role.
So 14 is the best score ally that exists in the game. Um, he's the best ally because of kind of the same reason we just talked about with Toribot. He doesn't have to be in control of combat to use his power. He can take over control of combat whenever he wants and do whatever he needs to do. He is extremely versatile. Obviously, he a lot like his big thing was always seeing play in energy decks. And then, if they stopped all your energies or did something like that, you could use his power to throw generic physicals for life cards. And he's in C the whole way, which is not nothing. I mean, C is a good place to be for an ally. So he was kind of the staple ally in score decks. If you were going to play one ally in your score deck, this is the first ally you would choose. Um, Going forward with building, I think that, like, so we're going to talk in a future video about Sensei and about South Kai especially. Most South Kai Sensei decks play South Kai because they have one ally they want to hit, right? Like if you're on future Gohan, you want to play future Trunks, you need to hit that one ally. The big one for 14 with me is Turles, right? If you're on Turles, you want to hit the Crusher Core, you play South Kai, you go get Crusher Core. I play 14 in every one of those decks. So I think that if you're on South Kai and you are a one ally deck, you should play 14 as your other ally, because you'd never, if you draw the 3 cards to start the game or to start your opponent enters on you turn 1 and you lose, you lose your one big ally, or you draw it into your hand or something like that. You don't want to have paying South Kai is a penalty. Putting South Kai in your deck is a absolute restriction you are putting on yourself. So you do not want it to not do anything. So it's very important to have a second target. And I think Android 14 stands out as what that second target is. If you're playing 10, 15 allies like Derek was talking about earlier, he's just a great inclusion in that too. He's also an Android for the Android decks. Like 14 is the number 1 score ally, was the number 1 score ally, and will always be the number 1 score ally.
Back. So why is Glorio cool? What's
So
he do?
Glorio is basically the same thing as 14. His difference is that he performs energy attacks. Obviously, an energy attack is better than a physical for 2 life cards. So what's the thing that holds Glorio back a little bit? Well, he has to pay for those energy attacks. So they do cost 2 stages each. That's a little bit annoying, but Glorio gets an added bonus to offset that cost, which is that damage from his attacks can't be prevented. So you can run any attacks you want through Glorio, and they cannot be prevented. Glorio is like having Chi-Chi's cheering drill in play at all times. That's incredibly good. Uh, Making your damage from your attacks not be prevented. I mean, we've seen with like Black Exertion how powerful that effect can be, and it does not shine any less on Glorio than it does on anybody else. To me, it's exactly the same thing I said about Android 14. If you're on a South Kai Future Gohan deck with Future Trunks, you should have Glorio in that deck. If you're on a deck that has 10 to 15 allies, you should have Glorio in that deck. If you just want a couple allies to go in your energy deck and you're playing 3 or 4 allies, Glorio should be one of those allies. And that to me is that simple. It's exactly the way I would treat 14. If I'm playing Vinegar Energy Beats and I decide I need 3 allies, ally number 1 is at 14. Number 2 might be Toribot. And then number 3, I don't know, probably Jace or something like that. We'll find another one. But like, these are the 3 allies that you want to start with when you're looking at allies for a deck. I get that there are some decks that don't care about playing allies. That's very fair. I would not play allies in every single deck. But I would, if I'm going to put allies into my deck, 14 and Glorio are the first ally I put into my deck, and Toribot's the second. And then after that, we can have a conversation about what you want to do with the rest of your deck.
Nail on the head. Making Gloria was really fun. It was cool to see the balance that he can give you now with just having no prevention on all your attacks. He's still just an ally, so he can still just die, but it's so worth it. So worth having. You're gonna run, if you're playing a black deck, you're gonna play 3 black exertions because it's like one of the best cards of black. Gloria is just like a 4th copy there. So if you'd always play black exertion, why would you not always play it in everything? Gloria and Toribot in every hero deck, Toribot in 14 and almost every villain deck. Yeah, the best friends. They're your best friends. Go in every deck.
Yep. So the core of what we wanted to do with this first video is just kind of give you a very generic overview of the cards to look at decks first. And I felt like that these are the ones that are worth talking about the most. Our plan for the next episode is to go into Sensei decks and what a Sensei deck is and how to pick your Sensei and what to put in your Sensei deck and all that kind of stuff. And then we're going to kind of branch out into let's talk about, this mastery and how to build this. And we'll include a little bit of that in that. We'll peer back to some of this. But like, generically speaking, like the Power 7 and some of those cards, we're just going to expect you to put those cards in your deck. So we're kind of we'll offhandedly mention them, but the core of that's going to be, when do you want the best friends and what cards in that style do you want and things like that. The only other thing I got to say, guys, is if you like this kind of content, you like this kind of video, please let us know. We're trying to throw some things at you. There's been a lot of interest lately about, how to deck building and how to build a deck. We got a lot of new players in the league, so we're just trying to present information. Obviously not everybody will agree with my takes here. I have a very some would say wild take on deck building and things like that. But you could also say results speak for themselves. My history says that I know what I'm doing and I know what I'm talking about. And so I got Derek in here to kind of, we wanted to throw some ideas and kind of see where we were at and what he thought and, try to bring me back down sometimes maybe if I go a little crazy. So we'll see how the future episodes go. Derek, you got anything else to add?
Well, luckily there's not a ton that's too controversial here yet. Maybe we'll have some bigger conversations to have later, but this first part's pretty easy, man. Most of the cards on every one of these slides, I think most people will have kind of already agreed with. Maybe the Cell's defense, maybe people wouldn't have talked about as much. Maybe too many people play too many Vic drills. But like generally, man, if you're gonna build a deck in the Score Z game, even if you're not playing in Z, right? Like even if you're just playing traditional Score, you're gonna play the Power 7. Like those are gonna just go in everything. You're probably gonna, if you're hero, you're gonna play your confrontations. If you're villain, you're gonna play your stare downs. If you're you're gonna always have or almost always have your spheres. You're probably gonna have a Vic drill depending on what your deck is doing. If you branch in Z, you're obviously gonna have your negation. Even if you're like just a straight up beatdown deck, like I play Saiyan Cell Saga or something. And I don't want to hit spheres off of. Oh, I didn't get to draw an extra card. I'll still run my one Saiyan negation because it's just having a sphere is that good, but it's not off color, so it doesn't hurt me for the things I need it to. All these cards just like make a lot of sense if you're gonna start building a deck in Scorzy or NZ, your first sort of 7, 10, 12 cards or whatever is going to kind of always be the same. And that's what we wanted to cover here first. Didn't want to get too long-winded about it. There's not a lot to say at this point yet about these. But like Nick said, as we go into the next set of videos, the sensei one will obviously have a little bit to say about each of the senseis. But the styled videos, just like Nick said, the stuff they like, we're not gonna in every single video, like if we do a video for every mastery, we're not gonna start every video of every mastery being like, all right, so you should put these 7 power 7 cards in, you should put like, because obviously you should. So that's why we wanted to have this kind of episode 1 first. As part of this series, kind of take this episode in, take episode 2 in, and then like choose your own adventure into whatever mastery you're gonna pick. Play these cards. You're gonna feel better when you have them. You're gonna feel much worse when you don't. And I'm sure as we keep going, we'll find some more of these controversial takes Nick's talking about. But for now, a lot of this stuff is common sense. Let's build some good decks, boys.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys.